The latest power list is here, and it's been fun. I've watched a bunch of these games twice, and sometimes even 3 times, because I've been trying to make sense of some of the teams whose records don't quite match what they're doing. And I've been trawling through the stats to try and understand also what has been a mess. I don't know if it's the mega auction or the extra teams, but everything feels a little clearer than the first power list, but still ultimately awfully confusing. But as always, a couple of caveats on the power list. This is not a points table. You can Google that. This is a deeper look into what the teams have been doing against who, and how this all sorts of works. And as always, I would like to apologize for having your team too high or too low, or not including every single fact about them that you personally feel very relevant. But let's get on with the show.
This is the last knot. My dad told me to say this.
Never did I ever think I was about to see this team jump up like this. I think they were the biggest outsiders with most of the bookmakers coming in. Of course, some of that has to be that they have won a lot of tosses, but it's also probably more to do with their bowling, right? In their next 3 games, they have Gujarat, CSK, and Delhi. They should be penciling in a 2-1 over that if any of their form holds up. And right at the moment, their form means so many damn wickets. They've been averaging under 17 with the ball over the last 5 games. And of course, their econ is low because they are taking so many victims that no one is out there long enough to actually score against them. This is obscene. And obviously, it won't last. But when you see as many players in form at the one time, even when there's a drop-off, you're assuming it won't drop that far off. It's probably unfair to suggest that just bowling first has had that much of an impact. But it's a hell of a help when your bowlers are already in incredible form. They haven't once had to pull their team back from a sloppy innings or had to worry about the pressure of the run rate. They just go out there and bowl well, and other teams get dismissed by them. They currently don't have a single major bowler averaging over 30, not any of them. Janssen was probably the weakest link for their bowling, and last game he took 3 wickets in an over. And think about it this way, Bhuvi came in here with not much form. Natarajan is back from injury. Malik and Janssen are still trying to become regulars. And Washington Sundar barely bowled in the last season. And yet all those players are performing massively above what you would expect considering everything at the start of the season. And they're doing it all at the same time. And that's how you win 5 games in a row, when everyone is overperforming at the same time. Gujarat, 6-1 ain't no joke. You have to respect it at a certain... It doesn't always pass the eye test when I watch them. But the only loss they've had was against the Sunrisers, who at this point seem like the at least most informed team. They do have the Sunrisers and RCB in their next 2, and I'm really interested to see how they go. A 1-1 split there is still really fine considering where they are. And after that, they have Punjab and Mumbai. So, they could end up with a 3-1 split in their next 4 games without playing particularly well, which will make them, what, 9-2? I haven't done the maths. Something like that. There's certainly been a lot of close games. They don't have a great net run rate, which does tell you that as much as anything. The last 2 wins were by 8 runs and with 1 ball remaining against 2 teams with less wins combined than they have on their own. Either they are a great clutch team or just things have gone their way a bit. My guess is it's probably just things have gone their way a bit, but they're not that far away from already qualifying because of this. It is worth looking at their bowling because they have 3 bowlers with an econ of 7.5 and below. And considering one of them is Hardik Pandya, that's a huge bonus. Rashid Khan is doing his thing. Mohammad Shami has been extraordinary so far. But Ferguson has been taking wickets at 25 as well. But it's really up top where the team has been at its best. They've been taking their wickets at 17 in the power play, which is even better than the Sunrisers, which seems obscene. But Hardik Pandya and David Miller need to be mentioned because their batting really hasn't been that special. Certainly not when you look at a team that is doing so damn well. But Hardik and Miller are both averaging over 70. Hardik with a strike rate of 136 in this sort of new position, new role that he's playing. And Miller is striking at 157. There are other batters doing various things, but this is what is holding them up. Rajasthan have been in pretty good form, right? And their next 3 games are Mumbai, Kolkata and Punjab. And this after a very good win where their shallow batting order was tested and the extra bowling lineup worked for them. It's hard not to rate them high at this time, even if there is that massive fragility in the middle. But I suppose part of me just wonders what happens when Josh Butler stops making like hundreds all the time or 50s all the time. Because he is pretty much Rajasthan's batting at the moment. He was 39% of their runs over the first 7 games. That's 2 openers in 1. He's a fucking 1-man top order, right? Which is pretty damn handy because their batting gets pretty thin later on. Hence all the need for Ashwin to pinch block or pinch hit or pinch. And while it is hard to look past Butler, it's worth having a look at Shimron Hetmeyer, who is having an absolutely huge year of his own. And Sanju Samson is also having a huge year of his own. As it's currently going, they're both probably having their greatest season so far. And while it's easy to do that while Butler is doing his thing, this is incredible and should be noted. And they're going to have to continue to get those sorts of runs out of those three players because there really isn't that much else to their batting lineup. So you might be thinking, wait a minute, if they're on top of the table and you've already said some nice things about them, why are they not higher? Well, essentially, they're winning games based on 4 players all in incredible form. The last game was probably a little bit different and was actually the one that I thought was the best of their wins. But they are really focusing on just a couple of players being good. Ashwin has been quite miserly all the way through the season, but he had 4 wickets in 7 games until the RCB collapse. Bolt has been fine, but certainly not spectacular. Prashant Krishna, he's on the edge of being really good. I will give him that. But Chahal took 18 wickets from 8 games. His bowling average is pretty much non-existent. And he didn't even take a wicket in that last game. So he had 18 wickets from 7 games. There's just a lot of players playing absolutely out of their skin at the moment. I just want to see what happens when that slows down, because it will. To be honest, I spent a lot of time trying to work out whether RCB or Lucknow should be higher. Lucknow lost to RCB and their 2 wins were over Mumbai. At this point, that's almost not a game. But their next 3 games are really easy though. They would want to go 3-zip in that part. And if they do, that'll mean they're 8 wins from 11 games. They've actually had a phenomenally easy schedule so far. But you can only beat who you play, and it's going to get harder from here. If you dive deeper into their record, they are 1-3 against teams in the top 5. Now, the points table is still working itself out, and it's early on in the year, but the Titans sneaked past them early on, then the Royals snuck past, and RCB beat them fairly comfortably. I'm not too worried about it because they were in the other 2 games, but it is something worth keeping an eye on going forward. They did beat the Sunrisers, but also that was actually before the Sunrisers became this risey. It does feel very much like a one-man band at the moment with KL Rahul. He's averaging double the next batter and striking at nearly 147. None of this feels all that weird, of course, because it's been a long time since he's had anything like a fully functioning batting lineup around him. He always ends up being pretty much all the organs and most of the limbs. It is worth talking about Krunal Pandya, who averaged 14 with the bat last year while striking at 116. He's rocking a 28 average this year while scoring at 1.47 runs per ball. Last year, he took 5 wickets at 53, while leaking nearly 8 runs and over, which was a career worst for him. This year, his economy is 6.78 with a 22 average. This is 2018 Krunal Pandya, and that was a very good vintage. I think the last 2 games for Bangalore have been slip-up games. Maybe that's wrong. I mean, the Sunrisers game was actually more a kick in the teeth game, wasn't it? And even the Rajasthan game. I mean, maybe they're beyond slip-ups. It just could be that they were 2 games in a row. Like, I would call both of those a throwaway game, but can you throw away 2 games in a row? I mean, maybe you can. I still really like Bangalore. I look at this side and I think they should be better, but they just have some fairly major issues. I mean, think about this. How did they lose to Rajasthan? They allowed Rian Parag to pull away from them at the death. They currently have the 2nd worst economy when it comes to bowling at the death. 10.7 runs and over. But what is worse is that none of their bowlers are taking wickets at that point. They're averaging 30. That's unbelievably high. Siraj is getting absolutely met after an all-time great season last year, and Akashdeep was also getting met before he got pulled from the side. And Harshal has stopped taking as many death wickets. They're actually lucky to be able to keep it at such a low economy because occasionally Hasaranga or Hazelwood has been so good. And the reason is probably because their batting has 2 top-order players who really haven't done anything for them at all. Earlier in the season, Virat Kohli looked out of form. It's currently hard to tell if he's out of form because he's in the middle so infrequently. Anuj Roy is scoring so incredibly slow, and those are on the occasions when he does actually score. And this top order, which on paper doesn't look terribly bad, it seems to be highly flammable at the moment. They can make a lot of runs, but they would have to get out of the power play without losing most of their batters to do that. I think their bowling is a bit of a 3-man attack at the moment. No one can hit Harshal Patel off the square until he gets to the death, and no one can stay in long when facing Hasaranga. Josh Hazelwood is doing both of those things and is bowling incredibly well. And Harshal is still getting wickets, but Hasaranga is going for a bit. And all 3 have been so good in patches that they've carried a lineup that has struggled a bit otherwise. Mohammad Siraj and Akashdeep have been terrible. And it's a bit like their batting. When you look at it overall, it doesn't look too bad. It's just that there's a couple of players just completely holding them back. Should be noted though that David Willey has done well with limited opportunities. At the very least, they understand what David Willey can do and they're letting him bowl in that position. Delhi's record is just all over the place at this point. They were all over Punjab, but had two pretty frustrating losses to Rajasthan and RCB. So it is starting to look like they lose when they play the good team, and their 3 wins are Punjab, Mumbai and KKR. And all of them have been pretty easy, but the losses are Gujarat, Lucknow, RCB and Rajasthan. All of this could mean nothing, but it feels less like nothing than it did with Lucknow's record. It's worth talking about the individuals. If you look at a bunch of their players in isolation, there's actually some very good seasons so far. The Fizz is going sub-8 with his economy despite bowling at the death. Khalil Ahmed is lighting up the place. My man Lalit Yadav is beefing up the bowling and the batting. Warner and Prithvi are tearing shit up at the top. And Rishabh is scoring fast again. Yay. Oh, also, Akshar has been hard to hit off the score, and also Akshar has been hard to hit off the square and smashing it when he gets in. To think that all of this is happening and they are less than 500 with their record is troubling. It's worth talking about the overseas though. Nokia has bowled 2.2 fairly ordinary, if we're being honest, overs since his injury. He was retained, but looked like a rock as one of the best bowlers in the league. But he didn't look good when he came back, and we haven't seen him since. Mitch Marsh and Tim Seifert have barely faced any balls across their games. And Rodman Powell is scoring at a strike rate of 146, but averaging 11 when doing so. Some local players like Shardul's bowling and Sarfaraz's batting have been disappointing. But to have an overseas batter averaging 11 and your retained bowler with 2.2 overs is just not ideal. Suboptimal. Shithouse. Chennai beat RCB with a big bowling team assisted score, and then they had 2 coin toss games and probably just didn't get close enough in the last game. But they were still there and thereabouts. So what it means is in the last 4 games, they've been challenging and there and thereabouts, which is a huge step up. That must feel like Christmas to them. I've been starting to think that there's been some kind of body swap between Shivam Dube and Ravi Jadeja. When it comes to batting, they're each sporting the other player's batting numbers, really. And I think this is good news because Dube seems to be having a breakout season that his talent has always suggested. And Jadeja won't stay in this slump for too much longer. In fact, even in the last game, he started to look a little bit better. Part of the problem is he's often been in too early and needs to be there at the death, which is where he's at his best. The overseas is troubling. Moeen Ali just hasn't made any runs and they haven't really bowled in that much. Dwayne Pretorius was dropped while he had good form. Chris Jordan hasn't really worked out. Bravo has done pretty well with the ball, but not so much with the bat. And the Santner Thikshana job share has worked fairly well. Though, to quote Jerry Seinfeld, what's the deal with Santner cosplaying as Moeen Ali? His strike rate is currently 83, and I think we can get that a lot lower. And in some ways, this is normal CSK role-playing overseas, but the problem is that the locals aren't doing particularly well either. Jadeja, Rayadu, Gaikwad, Chowdhury, all in poor form. They probably need an overseas star at the moment. Perhaps Milne or Conway would be the most obvious ones, or, you know, Moeen comes back and they give him another go. When you look at CSK, there isn't a part of the game that they're terrible at, but there isn't also a part of their game that they're great at either, other than perhaps death batting. And because they're so slow in the middle, they kind of negate that. They just don't have any obvious strength at the moment. I really don't know what to do with Punjab. They have 4 wins, but 3 of those include 1 game against Mumbai and 2 against CSK. They kind of veer between being pioneers and a complete clusterfuck. But they're 4-4, and it feels nowhere near as bad as it sometimes looks when you're watching them. And if you were to say to me, well, they should be ahead of CSK on your power list, I have no strong argument either way. I mean, they have beaten them twice. It's just that CSK seems to be in more of their games, whereas with Punjab, they're either very good or actually not in the arena. But I still almost shuffled them up. In truth, I suppose these 2 teams are probably on a similar tier at the moment. But they are the worst middle overs bowling team, and not by a little bit. They are allowing almost 50 runs per wicket, which is basically impossible in T20. It's like iron bowling for them. Oh, and it gets worse. Teams are scoring at nearly 10 runs and over compared to them. If you want to compare that to Gujarat, who are allowing 8.5 runs and over at the death, I think you'll understand that there's a huge problem there. In fact, they're just actually the worst bowling team by numbers. But most of that is just how bad they have been in the middle. They're also one of the poorest batting teams. But that is when you look at the season numbers. The last 4 games, which include 2 wins, by the way, they're averaging 22 runs per wicket and scoring at around 8 and over. The wickets are fine because they are willing to lose more wickets than other teams. But that hasn't continued to translate to faster scoring rates. It did at the start, but it's starting to slow down. They look like they're going to have to completely overperform with the bat just to stay at near 500, which probably still won't be enough. But it is worth pointing out a few members of the 160 club. Liam Livingston, Jitesh Sharma and Bhanuka Rajapaksa are all averaging around 30, and that's pretty good to start with, right? Especially Shikhar is averaging even more. But Jitesh is scoring at a strike rate of 164. Rajapaksa, 183. Livingston, 187. They did actually appear to drop Rajapaksa at one stage, which is mildly concerning. But these are great numbers. Usually I would say that there would be regressions to the mean, but I don't want to mention that, although I already have, because this is so much fun. If I'd done my power list a game earlier last time, I think I would have had Kolkata at the top. I think that was where I had penciled them in. Now they're in the middle of a 4-game losing streak, and nothing is looking good for them at the moment. They probably should have beaten Gujarat, but at 16 for 3, they were lucky to even get close in the end. They could have beaten Rajasthan if it wasn't for Chahal as well. And I almost pushed them up the list ahead of Punjab, but I looked at their next 3 games, and it's Delhi, Rajasthan and Lucknow. I mean, on paper, if nothing else, you'd think a 1-2 split is the best thing that's going to happen for them. They're in trouble. And part of this is because Umesh Yadav stopped destroying the team. And I know, in a way, I am blaming Umesh Yadav, who had an unreal start to the season, and that is incredibly unfair. And he's still one of Kolkata's best players. He's even chipping in with the bat occasionally, because, you know, they keep having to need it with the bat. But early in the season, Umesh was cutting the heads off some teams, and he's been okay since. But in his last 5 games, he's taken 3 wickets, and in the first 3, he took 8. They haven't been. No one else has stepped up. Let's talk about their other big names, though. Umesh is not really a big name. He didn't even go in the first round of the auction. So let's look at some of the big names. Pat Cummins might be batting at 2 runs a ball, but like last season, they look better when he isn't in the team. He has stopped taking wickets, and teams are scoring at almost 9 runs and over against him. It's quite clear that Venki Iyer has been, if not worked out, then at the very least, teams have worked out a way at the moment to slow him down. He's swinging really hard, but he's basically scoring at a run a ball, which is massively concerning. Nitesh Rana just hasn't managed to stay in, and Rahane just didn't work up the top. That's a lot of big name players who I suppose are out of form. And the biggest problem for KKR is they can no longer blame Owen Morgan for all of this. It's worth talking about the 2 West Indians though, which I suppose is the biggest of the big names. Andre Russell is 227 runs in at a strike rate of 180, averaging 45. Sunil Narine is currently 32 overs of bowling under his belt, and teams are scoring at less than a run a ball from him. And his average is also under 30. Also, Russell has had an improbable 10 wickets in 14 overs, while obviously getting a bit of tap at the death. And Narine is currently batting like the 2009 version of Sunil Narine, you know, the tail ender version. But even so, this is a lot of production to get out of your 2 main guys for a team to be below 500. Shows how much everyone else is not producing. Oh, and I suppose now we have to talk about Mumbai as well. Like, I had a look at their entire season, and I think there is only one really good contender for their best loss, and that is when MS Dhoni ate their still beating heart out in the final over. I can't think of another game where they were even that close towards the end. They've just been so out of every single game. Often so early on that it's like going to watch a movie where you've already seen the trailer and the trailer has spoiled the entire plot. I mean, their bowlers don't take wickets and they go for runs. I don't think you need an advanced PhD in cricketology to be able to understand that's not ideal. Punjab might actually have them for worst bowling lineup, but Punjab don't have Jasprit Bumrah in their side. Unadkat, Mills and Sams have let them down with the left arm. And that's like Mumbai's thing, right? The left arm. What is a Mumbai team without quality left arm bowling? Well, I think we're finding out. Mumbai is actually getting really nice, solid, polite starts with the bat in terms of runs per over and wickets. And then that all goes away in the middle. They lose wickets, they score slow, just game after game. And they've still had Tilak or Sky to save them a couple of times. But sadly for them, they haven't been able to do it every game. So how can they win a game? Their next 2 matches are against Rajasthan and Gujarat. I mean, that should probably be losses. That means they will be 10 games without a win. That should be almost impossible in T20 cricket. So again, the Mumbai Indians, they are finding a way to do something that just other T20 teams cannot do. And that's it. That's the end of our second power list. I'm glad that you think every pick is perfect. Congrats on agreeing with me. That just shows how beautiful and intelligent you actually are. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks with another power list. In the meantime, watch all the other videos. If you can help out on Patreon or buy me a coffee, thank you. But subscribe, press the bell thing, and tell all your friends. Do all the stuff that everyone talks about at the end of YouTube videos for me. We'll see you next time.